everyone, my name's Ashley. I'm one of the tutors with Lisa's Study Guides. I've been working there for 4 years and this year's actually my 5th year. And I'll be talking to you about how to prepare for your English exam throughout the year rather than cramming just at the end. So first, how do you prepare for your exam from the summer holidays? So you're probably thinking, what do you mean summer holidays? Isn't that the time to relax before you start school? But really, summer holidays are a really important part of Year 12 English because they set you up for how the rest of the year is going to go. So first and most importantly, read your books. Make sure you've read them all and watch any films that you have so that before you start school you have a really clear idea of where your year's going to be. If you haven't read your text, you're more likely to be cramming later in the year when that time could have been spent actually preparing for your SAC. And the next thing you can do in your summer holidays is actually research about your text. So although you might not want to start thinking of themes or any ideas at the beginning of the year, you definitely want to get an idea of what the context of your texts are actually about. So maybe that's history, maybe that's any reviews that you can find online, maybe it's a film relating to the book that you've read just to get a better visual in your mind. But whatever it is, I really recommend that you actually research a lot more about your text in the holidays so that before you even go to school, you're so ready and prepared and all you have to do is start actually analyzing your text rather than beginning from the start. Another really important reason why you should be researching your text is that it gives you an idea of what things you find interesting. Something that's really important in English as a subject that has no right or wrong answer is finding things that you can study that are really interesting to you. So if you can find those things before the school even commences, then you're more likely to feel really comfortable throughout the year and then you can focus on those things throughout. As you begin this school year, a lot of schools will start with text response or creative. So after you've read your text, the most important thing to do is start getting an idea of what themes and ideas you're actually going to be writing about. As you read your texts, you might want to make notes as you go, just so that you don't have to go back and reread it multiple times. So what I really recommend is making notes about quotes, anything interesting that stands out for you. If it's a film, you might make notes about cinematography, film techniques, anything that you find that's interesting to you, and organize it in a document. So regardless of whether this is creative or whether this is text response, it's really important to start organizing your notes really early on in the year to save you time later in the year before your English exam. So ways that you can do that is by making a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet and basically organizing all your quotes on one side of the document and all your analysis on the other side. So maybe at the beginning of the year, you might only start with putting in quotes or any cinematography you find in a film, but later in the year, you might start analyzing the actual evidence you found. And that will save you so much time as you go later in the year because all your quotes and evidence are organized, rather than going back through your text right in September and stressing about how much time you actually have before your exam starts. So additional things you can be reading other than just your text are study guides, anything your teachers provided you, so essays or notes. High scoring essays are a great example of that. Additionally, you can also look at critical analyses. So what critical analyses are basically PhD or thesis documents of literature students at university. And what they do is they really research in-depth knowledge about the text you're studying. Rather than just focusing on characters and themes within the text, critical analyses provide different interpretations on the text itself. So what that allows you to do is if you're trying to do an agree or disagree prompt, you'll have different perspectives to reference rather than just focusing on your own. And that also is something that will help you a lot further on in your career when you go to uni and potentially what you do further on from that. So I really recommend finding some critical analyses. Definitely ask your teacher because a lot of the time they will have access to some. Otherwise, Google Scholar is a great platform for that. And a lot of the theses and PhD documents are free to access. So once you've got all your notes together for both the creative and your text response text, what I really recommend you do is organize it by themes. So that's when you'll start looking at school, so you don't have to do this on your own necessarily, but going through school and finding a lot of themes that you really find relatable within your texts. And what you would do after from that is actually organize them in a document. Once you begin essay writing, it'll be a lot easier to organize everything because it's already put into a document for you. Something really important to note is by organizing your notes very early on for your text response and creative, it will allow you to decide which text you prefer better. So at the end of the year, you can only pick one text to write a text response on. And so by reading them very early on in the year, you won't be in that struggle between deciding which one is better. So the first step in term 1 will be organizing your notes. After you've finished organizing your notes and compiling all the evidence that you need for your essay, I will suggest writing an essay. Writing one full essay before your SAC is so important because not only will it help you get a good result for your SAC, but it will help you have some actual tangible things you can look at when you get to your September holidays. So ways that you can do this are by writing drafts, planning, and then writing a full essay with lots of feedback from your teacher. So what I would recommend is only writing one essay until it's complete rather than writing multiple that are not complete. And what I mean by this is once you've written an essay, give it to your teacher and they should mark it and tell you anything that you could improve on. Keep giving your essay to your teacher until it's completely perfected and there's no more comments left. Once they're very happy with it, you can move on to a different prompt. Why I suggest this is because once you've written one essay and it hasn't been perfected, you're more likely to make the same mistakes in another essay. So writing one great essay is super important because not only will it make sure that you get a great mark for your SAC, but it'll also really make sure that you're ready for your exam at a very early stage of the year. Keep your essay until the end of the year when you get to the September holidays so that you can reference it towards your exam. Make sure that you do have one full essay done. It will make your life a lot easier. So most schools, as they get to term 2, will be focusing predominantly on language analysis. And language analysis is something that you've probably done quite a few times at school, and it's something that you can always perfect and always improve on. The best way to prepare for a language analysis for the trial exams and also for the end of the year exam is to practice. So even at the beginning of the year, what I really recommend is practicing as many language analyses as you possibly can. So the best way to do that is finding articles from your teacher, finding resources online, and just going through the motions of practicing it. So initially you might find it quite difficult to get into the rhythm of it, as most people do at the beginning of the year. But as you start practicing a lot more, you'll find that you get the habits of language analysis and you find that a structure works for you. So begin with mastering your ideal language analysis structure. So a lot of teachers will have their own structures that they'll provide their students, and focus on one that you find really useful. So whether that's using a bridging method, whether that's using just a single analysis structure and then working in the second analysis later, but find something that really helps you and perfect that before you do anything else. The way to perfect a structure is making sure you know what to include, what vocabulary might be useful for this kind of structure, and also how you can incorporate different styles and formats of that language analysis. So whether they're comparatives, whether they're speeches, whether they're editorials, it doesn't matter. Just making sure that you're very comfortable incorporating each one. The best thing to do at the beginning of the year is to start with practicing short articles. So it's just a single analysis article that has no comparative element. The reason for this is as you get more comfortable with language analysis, you'll find that you feel really comfortable doing the single analysis structure, and later in the year you can start incorporating more comparative. Single analysis is not something necessarily that will be on the exam, but it's always good to be prepared regardless. So by focusing on single analysis structure, you're purely focusing on how an author engages with their writing, what techniques they might include, what vocabulary they're using as well. And as you develop better skills, you might start incorporating how their writing compares to another author's writing. By completing this process in term 2, where you're just starting with single analyses and practicing multiple versions of them, you're going to feel so ready for the end of the year because you've practiced a lot. So rather than just focusing on your SAC and then leaving language analysis and that's it, the best way to do it is be progressively building up your skills throughout the rest of the year so that you don't lose any of your habits. Once you've perfected the single analysis structure, you might start incorporating a large variety of different essay styles so that you can feel really comfortable with whatever might come up on the exam. So the most important thing with language analysis, even at the beginning of the year, is maintenance of your skills. So it's probably been a while since you've done a language analysis if you're in term 2, and you probably have realized that your skills have kind of dwindled a little bit. So what you really don't want to happen is a dwindling of your skills in year 12. So it's making sure you're really prepared for your SAC and that you're also really prepared for your exam. So don't forget language analysis in that period between language analysis and the exam itself. So this will also ensure that you've learned all these skills throughout the year rather than having to relearn very basic skills at the end of the year with no time to actually perfect them. As you start to feel really comfortable with all the different structures of language analysis, you might start to incorporate more complex techniques, longer articles, and also more complex vocabulary so that you can feel really ready for the end of the year. Okay, so term 3 is your last full term, and most schools will be focusing on comparative. So what comparative is 2 different texts and you're comparing them in one essay. The difference between how you prepare for a comparative and how you would prepare for a text response is that there's 2 different texts to focus on, and you have to make sure that you're really aware of the different themes and how they overlap. So very similar to a text response, as you're reading your comparative text, making sure you're making notes about them and you're finding out different evidence, reading different critical analyses, study guides, anything you can find about your text. The most important thing is understanding what your two texts are about, because it's not just something that you can fluke. You have to understand how they overlap and how they interact with each other. Again, something really important to do early on in the year with your comparative is organizing your notes. So just how I mentioned with your text response and creative, organize your notes very early on, so in term 3, rather than leaving that until your exam. Exam preparation should purely be about practicing essays and building up your skills, perfecting your skills as well, rather than relearning things you should have already known earlier in the year. So something early on that you should know about your text is the similarities and differences, finding themes that connect those two texts. Once you feel really comfortable with just understanding the basics, go into the depth of similarities and differences and why they're important within your text. So teachers have so many different structures that they use for comparative. So what is really important for you to do is actually find something that you feel comfortable using. So whether that's using a bridging method and only connecting the similarities and differences in the middle of your essay, or whether you just integrate both texts within each paragraph. Find something that's really comfortable for you rather than having to relearn a new structure at the end of the year because you just weren't confident with the original structure you chose. As you get more comfortable with using the structure that you've found, making sure you're practicing different prompts as well. Initially start with a prompt you find quite straightforward and easy so that you can build a great essay and perfect it. So making sure that each draft you write, give to your teacher and get feedback before you write another one. Otherwise, you're more likely to make the same mistakes. Once you've perfected one draft, move on to a different prompt that you find a little bit more complex so that you can build up your skills and feel confident both for your SAC and also for the prompt you might get for your exam. Perfect your essay in the same way that I've mentioned for your text response and creative, and use that essay as the baseline for your September trial exams. So what this means is making sure that you use that essay for every other essay you write, and you'll have something to work on rather than writing something from scratch later in the year. So you've reached the September holidays. Now what? You've done all this preparation throughout the year. How do you actually go about studying for your exam now? So the most important things are finding all your resources that you've put together earlier in the year and getting them all together for the end of the year. So whether that's essays or your notes and all the prompts that you've been given by your teacher as well. The September holidays are really just about enhancing the skills you already have throughout the year. So that's making sure that you are very confident when you walk into that exam room, and specifically making sure that you can do all these different elements of the exam under timed conditions. For the text that you've chosen for text response, make sure you look over the notes you've written earlier in the year. So this can be to find out anything that you've missed potentially, things that have changed in terms of your opinion, or things that you found that might be more interesting to include. Once you've identified any flaws in your notes, add to those notes and potentially write another essay. So you've already written an essay earlier in the year, try writing another essay just to see how you're going with your knowledge of the text. If you find that you're not so sure about some parts of the text, you might want to just revise those parts rather than going through the whole text all over again. The next step is finding a range of prompts that you can practice for your essay. So for the exam, you don't know what prompt you're going to get. So the main thing to do is by practicing different prompts so that you're going to be comfortable regardless of what you get. A great way to cover a large range of prompts is identifying the main themes that come up within the prompts that you found. So focus on those themes within your essay rather than specifically only focusing on the prompt itself, so you can cover a larger range of prompts and you feel really comfortable regardless of the theme that comes up on the exam. The most important thing to do in the lead up to your exam is practice within timed conditions. Most students will dedicate 60 minutes to their text response portion of their English exam, so making sure you find what time works for you and practicing that time in September. The main thing for the end of the year for text response is practicing what you already know rather than relearning what you've already done throughout the year. For language analysis, you've done so much practice throughout the year if you've maintained your skills, and all you really have to do in September is keep up that practice. So practice a larger range of articles, maybe practice planning a lot more articles, and the most important thing is to practice within timed conditions. Give yourself 60 minutes plus an additional 10 minutes of reading time so that you can prepare how you do it in the actual exam setting. Reading time is extremely important for language analysis because it gives you the opportunity to read the article, analyze the article in your head before you actually go into writing it. It saves you valuable time in the actual exam when you're writing. Once you've actually begun writing, make sure that you're really comfortable with the article itself and you know exactly what you're going to be focusing on. So keep practicing that in September so that you feel really comfortable as the exam approaches. Another thing you can do for language analysis is practice vocabulary. So you're probably pretty comfortable with a lot of vocabulary by this point in the year, but you still want to make sure that you can practice it more and incorporate new words that potentially you haven't used before. Making sure, as the most important thing, that you know what every word you're using means. If you don't know what it means, don't include it in your essay. Something to keep in mind is just focusing on your weaknesses. It's not about trying to do 20 different trial exams or 20 different essays. It's about focusing on things that you're not comfortable with and how you can build up your confidence for the exam. If you're not sure about something, that's fine. Work on that rather than having to focus on too many things at once. For the comparative portion of September holidays, it's very similar to text response. Just focus on preparing different essays with different prompts, using the notes you already have, fixing up any notes you already have, and then practicing within timed conditions. The main things to focus on are making sure you're really comfortable with similarities and differences within your text, and finding things that can make your text a little bit better. So whether that's different meta language, whether that's symbolism, whether that's anything that's from a film, cinematography. So just focusing on things that can enhance your essay rather than just focusing on things that you've already done earlier in the year. September is also really important for the editing process of your exam. Every single time you write an essay, give yourself a break before you keep going and make sure you've edited your essay as well. So editing ensures that you're not making the same mistakes again. It's also really good to see how comfortable you are reading over your essay. So if you find that you're not sure if you've done some things right, ask a friend to read over it, ask a teacher if they can, just so that you feel really comfortable with what you're writing rather than just writing a lot but not getting much out of it. So I mentioned this a little bit with language analysis, but reading time. Reading time is a pivotal point for your exam because it decides whether you are ready to start writing or whether you've just wasted 15 minutes of your time. Reading time is important because it allows you to read first the exam you're doing, pick what prompts you're going to do, and also get an understanding of what the article's about. So what I would do is find a lot of different trial exams that you can look at and purely just practice reading time. So going through, giving yourself 15 minutes and seeing how much you got out of that 15 minutes at the end of the time. If you find that you're struggling to read through articles a lot, then maybe something that you should be working on a little bit more. So once you're really happy with how all the different components of your exam are coming together, the last step is actually putting it together. So writing a 3-hour trial exam. I wouldn't recommend doing these every day, but I think they're a great way to see how well you've progressed throughout the year and how comfortable you are for the exam. So making sure you give yourself the 3 hours of writing, the 15 minutes of reading, sitting down and doing it one big session rather than splitting it up, and then giving yourself a break afterwards. Make sure you check over your exam as well to see how well you've done and identify any flaws that you might have found within your writing that you can improve on later in the year. So now that you've got to the end of the year, it's time for your exam and good luck. If you're looking for any more additional help or resources, Lisa's study guides has plenty, so go check it out. All the links will be below for any blogs that you want to see. Thanks guys.